Coming up on New Day at Arirang, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has authorized Pfizer's antiviral COVID-19 pill, making it the first oral treatment that can be taken at home to fight the virus. South Korea is expected to report over 6,000 new COVID-19 infections Thursday. As cases continue to rise, the country grapples with a lack of ICU beds for the critically ill. And South Korea and China will hold their 9th vice-ministerial strategic dialogue in the coming hours. Seoul's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-gun will virtually meet his Chinese counterpart Lau Wei-chung to discuss bilateral ties, Korean Peninsula affairs, as well as regional and global issues.
Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on December 23rd here in Seoul, South Korea. We're just 2 days away from Christmas now, Mo-kyun. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broom.
Yes, and I'm Kim Mo-kyun. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
Our top story this morning, though, U.S. drug regulators have approved Pfizer's anti-COVID-19 pill, which could potentially prove to be an important weapon in the fight against the pandemic as well as the Omicron variant.
The approval means Americans will be able to take the drug at home to head off the worst effects of the virus. Kim Hyo-sun starts us off.
The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has authorized Pfizer's antiviral COVID-19 pill, making it the first oral treatment that can be taken at home to fight the virus. Data from the drug maker's clinical trial shows its two-drug antiviral regimen was 90% effective in preventing hospitalizations and deaths among patients with a high risk of severe illness. Lab data also suggests the treatment is effective against the Omicron variant. U.S. drug regulators authorized the oral drug for the treatment of adults and pediatric COVID-19 patients at least 12 years of age outside of hospital settings. The pills are to be taken every 12 hours for 5 days, beginning shortly after the onset of symptoms. Pfizer says it's ready to begin immediate delivery of the drug, which will be sold under the brand name Paxlovid. The company adds it has raised its production projections for next year to 120 million courses from the original 80 million. South Korea's Ministry of Food and Drug Safety also said Wednesday that it has begun reviewing emergency approval of Paxlovid. If authorized, Paxlovid, seen by many experts as a possible game changer in the fight against the pandemic, would be the first oral antiviral of its kind in South Korea. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Omicron infections continue to increase both here in South Korea and more rapidly in many other parts of the world. South Korean authorities are working on increasing efficiency in the healthcare system, which is under tremendous strain right now, and on developing new PCR tests that can detect Omicron within 24 hours.
To fill us in on the COVID-19 updates here in South Korea and around the world, our reporter Kim Yeon-sung is here in the studio with us. Good morning, Yeon-sung.
Good morning.
So Yeon-sung, let's start with the COVID-19 tally for today.
Right. So like how we start on most days, new cases logged up to 9 p.m. Wednesday stood at around 5,308. It's more than 1,000 cases fewer than the tally marked at the same time Tuesday and the same time last week. The total tally announced Thursday morning will likely be over 6,000. New infections were detected among young unvaccinated children, with another cluster infection arising from a daycare center in Yeouido, Seoul. 16 young children and 3 adults have become infected.
Now, the shortage of ICU beds, this problem has snowballed in recent weeks. We have talked about it on many a New Day at Arirang. But are there any plans in place to try and resolve this issue?
Right, just to fill you in on how serious the problem is, so as of Wednesday, there are 278 ICU beds left nationwide. Authorities are working to speed up the turnover rates for patients in ICU beds so that the people who need the beds the most can get them as quickly as possible. As part of this effort, authorities have ordered 210 patients who've had more than 20 days of treatment to leave their ICU beds. Medical professionals will redirect these patients to other hospitals or other hospital beds, but if the patients refuse to move out from the ICU beds, they'll be fined according to the Infectious Disease Control and Prevention Act.
Now, Yunsen, let's focus more on the Omicron variant. How are South Korean health authorities handling this threat?
Right, so health authorities are developing new PCR tests. Central Control Headquarters said Wednesday that they're currently developing a COVID-19 variant test kit that will quickly identify all 5 variants of concern, including Omicron. So the current PCR tests in South Korea aren't really able to pluck out the Omicron strain from the other COVID-19 infections. So currently, scientists are using DNA sequencing as a method to detect Omicron, but this process takes 4 to 5 days. So authorities are finding it difficult to nip the virus spread in the bud, especially when dealing with a virus that spreads as quickly as Omicron. The new PCR test that the authorities are currently developing will give results in a day, which will provide more ammo to health authorities who are looking to prepare an early response.
Okay, so that's potentially good news, but let's broaden our horizons and look at the situation as it is outside of South Korea right now. How are other countries faring, particularly in terms of the new Omicron strain?
Right, so Europe has been hard hit with Omicron, and the UK has seen another record high of infection cases Wednesday local time. Their daily tally soared above 100,000 for the first time. France may not be too far from seeing a similar situation. The French health minister projected that their daily cases may jump from 70,000 to 100,000 in the near future. He also said that Omicron may become the dominant strain as early as next week, as it already accounts for about 1/5 of the new infections in its capital city, Paris. Germany's health experts said that it may take around 3 weeks for Omicron to take over as the dominant strain. And the German health minister mentioned the need for a 4th COVID-19 vaccination shot.
So it's been almost a month since the Omicron variant we learned about the Omicron variant. So were there new findings from scientists about this variant?
Right, so Morgan, I'm kind of happy to end this report in a slightly more positive note. So day after day of seeing Omicron back surges in infections, cases in South Africa seem to have simmered down recently, and experts say that South Africa may have gotten past its biggest hump in infections. After hitting a record of 27,000 daily cases, the tally dropped to 15,000 early this week. The downward trend seems to be continuing, although it's too early to draw any definite conclusions, and despite the fact that the daily tally is not an accurate measure of virus behavior, scientists are suggesting a rosier outlook, that Omicron infections may come in a short wave. And the good news is that Omicron hasn't really brought severe spikes in hospitalizations and deaths. Take a listen to an expert's take on why she thinks Omicron has been quick to recede.
It's that we had a lot of infections, so people really start creating immunity in the community, and so there are not that many susceptible individuals that will be infected. So it's epidemiologically it makes sense.
All right, Yunsen, thank you so much for your report today. We'll talk to you again tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. The World Health Organization this week issued a grim warning that the sheer volume of new COVID-19 infections in the coming weeks, particularly of the Omicron variant, could threaten health services not only in Europe but also in other hotspots like North America. The agency's Europe Regional Director listed 3 countries in particular, Portugal, Denmark and the UK, as some European countries where Omicron is becoming or is already the dominant strain. He added that in those countries, cases are doubling every 1.5 to 3 days. And he says that is generating previously unseen transmission rates.
The official went on to say the massive amounts of new infections could lead to more hospitalizations and disruptions of other critical health services, affecting people needing care for other serious diseases. For more on where we stand globally in regards to the Omicron strain, we're joined by Ben Cowling, Chair Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Hong Kong. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Professor, let's start with the data. There's still hope Omicron will be milder than Delta or other strains that have gone before it. So does the data, as you see it right now, suggest that may well be the case?
Well, certainly Omicron infections in South Africa are milder than their previous Delta infections or other infections, but it's not clear whether that's because of an intrinsic difference in the virus, that it's just less severe in general, or particularly because, as your correspondent mentioned, there's more population immunity in South Africa. So that remains to be seen. But I think we're now coming towards an understanding that Omicron is somewhat less serious on average, but the vastly greater number of cases is still going to mean that Omicron poses a major threat. So even if it's a little bit milder, the sheer number of cases mean there's still going to be a lot of serious cases, unfortunately.
Now, the man who invented the mRNA vaccine, which Pfizer and Moderna use to protect against COVID-19, a man by the name of Dr. Robert Malone, tweeted Wednesday, I don't know whether you saw it, but he said that since Omicron has an R0 of between 7 and 10, meaning one person can infect between 7 and 10 people, it's likely to blow in, quote, like a hurricane. However, he added that if you're young and healthy, you should be fine, but older people should be prepared. Do you share his view that Omicron is going to be omnipresent before we know it? And how should old and or sick people prepare, as he puts it?
Well, I think if you look at the case curves in the United Kingdom, it's almost a vertical line. In the US, I think in New York, I just saw the curve as well. It's like a vertical line. Once Omicron starts going, it can take off very fast. And I know that there are cases now in South Korea. So you may see the same pattern within the next couple of weeks. But what we haven't yet seen in the UK and New York and elsewhere is a corresponding rise in the hospitalization counts. And so far, that's good news. But as I said earlier, we're still expecting that there are going to be corresponding rises in severe cases fairly soon. So in South Korea, that does mean I think you have to be on high alert now for larger and larger numbers of cases over the holiday period, and then an increase in hospitalizations threatening your hospital system. And I know your intensive care units are already very full. And one thing I would add, Omicron is not only a threat to the hospital system because of the severe cases, it's also a threat because whenever a doctor or a nurse tests positive, they then may have to isolate themselves, and then the doctor's down on the staff. And that's going to pose a major problem as well around the world.
But Professor, on a brighter note, we just reported that a few hours ago, the FDA gave the green light to Pfizer's oral COVID-19 treatment. The FDA says it will be a useful tool to fight the virus, especially since the emergence of the Omicron variant. How big of a positive is this approval in the fight against the pandemic?
I think it's good news. 2 years ago, when the pandemic started, we knew that we needed vaccines and antiviral drugs, ideally, to help us bring an end to the pandemic. We've had vaccines for almost a year now. And today, as you said, the antiviral drug from Pfizer was approved. I don't know how much supply there is and how soon it will be available outside the United States, but I think it does have the potential to prevent a lot of severe cases if it can be given in the right way to the right kind of people and if there are enough supplies. So I do think it's exciting news.
Yeah, and finally, Professor, many developed countries, as I'm sure you're aware, are in the early stages of giving older people booster shots. However, given the fact that it does take several days, if not a few weeks, for this booster to kick in, to become effective, wouldn't that suggest it's already too late for boosters to be effective against this tidal wave, like you said, vertical line of Omicron that's forecast to hit us here in South Korea imminently, you would imagine?
Yeah, I mean, that means there's a lot of urgency now to get as many booster doses done as possible, because once you start seeing that vertical line, as you said, there's not going to be a lot more time to give out a lot more booster doses before they would really be needed. So I think now time is of the essence, and try to do as much boosting as possible. And I know the travel restrictions are going to help a little bit just to slow down the importations of Omicron and slow down the start of that vertical curve. And then once you do see the vertical curve Some public health measures, I'm sure, will be brought back in, and that will help to slow it down as well a little bit. But right now, if it's possible to do more third doses, I would strongly encourage more people to get their third dose, especially older people and people with underlying medical conditions.
All right. Professor Cowling, thank you as always for shedding some light on these big questions. We appreciate you joining us, and hopefully we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
South Korea and China will hold their 9th Vice Ministerial Strategic Dialogue in the coming hours. Seoul's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-gun will virtually meet his Chinese counterpart, Lau Wei-chung. The discussions will include bilateral ties, Korean Peninsula affairs, as well as regional and global issues. They could also touch upon higher-level exchanges, possibly meaning a virtual summit between Presidents Moon and Xi. This whole Beijing strategic dialogue is being held for the first time in more than 4 years. Eyes are also on whether they will discuss the Beijing Winter Olympics as a U.S.-led diplomatic boycott. South Korean tech giant SK hynix has been given the green light from China to buy Intel's NAND flash memory business. Through the takeover, SK hynix aims to boost its capacity to build NAND chips used in smartphones and data center servers. Peinzi has the story.
SK hynix has won approval from Chinese authorities for its takeover of Intel's NAND memory chip business, clearing the way for its planned 2025 merger. The company had earlier secured permission from U.S. and European authorities, so getting the green light from China was the final hurdle and has now secured regulatory approvals from all 8 countries that it needed to. There was speculation that it would be difficult for the South Korean chipmaker to win China's approval, or that it could be delayed significantly, amid heightened tensions between the U.S. and China. China's market regulator said Wednesday that it had approved the deal, but with conditions. This included conditions that SK hynix should not supply PCI Express, an interface standard for connecting high-speed components to China's domestic market at unreasonable prices. The Chinese regulator also said SK hynix should not force customers in China's market to exclusively purchase products from SK hynix or companies controlled by it, and that it should not enter into deals with its main competitors in China that exclude or restrict competition. SK hynix is the world's second-largest NAND memory chip maker, after Samsung Electronics taking 13.5% of the global market share. By taking over Intel's business, which currently has nearly 6% of the global market share, the South Korean company will be able to own around 19%. Last October, the U.S. chip giant agreed to sell its NAND memory chip unit to SK hynix for $9 billion, planning to focus on its Optane memory business instead, which it deems to be more lucrative. SK hynix will pay $7 billion in the deal's first phase, and it will pay the rest by March 2025. It's also set to take over Intel's facility plant in Dalian, China. Peinzi, Arirang News.
Large South Korean companies such as Samsung, LG, and Hyundai are appointing new executives to ready for the post-pandemic world. Many names on the list are in their 30s and 40s. Min Suk-hyun reports.
Baby boomers are retiring, and the next generations, the so-called Generation X and Millennials, are taking over. Hyundai Motor Group last Friday announced its biggest executive shuffle, promoting 203 new executives, and about 30% of them are in their 40s. The latest reshuffle signals that the company is seeking change and innovation through young blood. The next generation of leaders took seats in key future technologies and new business sectors, such as electric vehicles, infotainment, and other advanced information and communications technologies. Meanwhile, Samsung Electronics also announced 198 new executives, and among them, 4 new managing directors are in their 30s and 10 new vice presidents are in their 40s. The youngest to be promoted to director was 37-year-old Park Sung-bum, an expert in processor design, and the youngest vice president promoted at the company this year is 45-year-old Kim Chan-woo. Samsung said its latest promotions were based on performance, showing that it's putting less weight on age and length of employment. This drive for a generational shift in executive levels is also being pushed by other major companies, including LG and SK Group. Companies believe young executives will help them drive new growth as they are a better fit for discovering innovative businesses and promising future industries.
Emerging industries such as IT and bio are all quite new, and people familiar with that technology are mainly in their 30s and 40s, so companies have no choice but to appoint them in order to enter new business sectors.
Also, the ongoing pandemic and global supply chain disruptions has highlighted the importance of being prepared for the unexpected. Companies believe that young executives are better at responding swiftly to industry changes and challenges. But there are some looming concerns over this rapid change.
So rather than simply thinking that a certain age group should be replaced and that a new generation of young people should lead the business, depending on the nature of a company's business, the existing experienced leaders can offer their know-how, expertise, networking, and business skills which add great value to the company.
In this year's management shakeup, more women were also appointed to key positions. Professor Lee Ju-hee from Ewha Women's University says this is an opportunity to improve female representation and redefine the term corporate leadership.
I hope that this will be an opportunity to change the meaning of corporate leadership. A new leadership in which decision-making can be more democratic, decentralized, and responsive to social responsibility.
She also expects this will give women more hope, motivating them to carry on with their careers. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
As part of South Korea's goal to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050, officials on Wednesday unveiled the nation's plans to train more energy professionals. The government is setting aside some $200 million for the program and aims to have trained 20,000 people by the end of the decade. Chang Tae-hyun has this report.
The South Korean government is to train 20,000 new technical professionals working in the field of energy by the year 2030. The Trade and Labor Ministries made the announcement on Wednesday at their jointly held 22nd Job Committee as part of South Korea's plans to achieve carbon neutrality. The energy industry will be digitalized and decarbonized, but there isn't currently enough manpower capable of working in such fields. So, the government has laid out a roadmap to train 3,000 researchers and 5,000 professional field workers by 2025. A total of some 20,000 people will be trained by 2030 as part of a project that will cost $39 million. Some $155 million will be used to convert industrial infrastructure, which is 3 times more than what was invested this year. The country will also be expanding its training infrastructure. Currently, there are 5 energy innovation institutes in South Korea, but that number will double to 10 by 2025. There are also 5 graduate schools in the country that teach related courses, but the number will triple to 15 by 2025. At Korea Polytechnics University, new majors will be added related to eco-friendliness and low carbon. And it'll also have courses that coal power plant workers can take. South Korea used to hold job fairs for workers in the energy field once in 2 years. But starting next year, they will be held twice a year in April and October to provide more opportunities to energy workers. Chang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
The U.S. economy grew at a slightly faster pace than an earlier projection in the third quarter. According to the government's revised figures released Wednesday, U.S. GDP increased at an annual rate of 2.3% in the July to September period. That's up from a prior estimate of 2.1%. However, it still marks the slowest growth since the second quarter of last year, when the U.S. was largely locked down. It's also a slowdown compared to the 2 previous quarters due to supply chain disruptions and the spread of COVID-19. However, some analysts forecast a stronger fourth quarter driven by a recovery in consumer spending. The United States has issued broad authorization to allow the UN, U.S. government agencies and aid groups to provide humanitarian aid to Afghanistan without concerns over sanctions against the Taliban. The U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control on Wednesday released 3 licenses, allowing related agencies to conduct official business with the Taliban and other subgroups of that organization. The approval also allows NGOs to deal with 2 blacklisted groups, but only on humanitarian projects. Since the Taliban takeover in August, nearly 23 million people in Afghanistan are facing a severe shortage of food. NATO has raised its operational readiness for the first time to respond to the deployment of Russian troops along the border with Ukraine. It explained Wednesday that its raising of the readiness of its 40,000-strong response force to protect its members in Eastern Europe. Now, this change in level means the troops should be ready for deployment in a crisis zone within 5 days instead of the standard 7 days. Russia's top diplomat said Wednesday that Washington and Moscow will sit down for security talks early next year in an effort to defuse tensions.
And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for Global Insight and an in-depth look at world stories.
Thank you very much, Morgan. It is indeed time for Global Insight, where we speak to people from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, today we talk about Christmas. Christmas is usually a time for families to gather, exchange gifts, have turkey, and enjoy a lot of silly games and all the festivities. We also take the time to think about our neighbours who may not be as fortunate and lend a helping hand. Now, South Korea is the only country in East Asia to recognise Christmas as a national holiday, but Christmas here may not be so familiar for those who are accustomed to Western traditions of spending the day with family. We talk about the differences today with Han Kyu-soo, Associate Professor of Communications and Media Studies at Monash University in Melbourne, and Jacob Minell, a graduate student at Seogang University's Graduate School of International Studies in Seoul. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And well, let's start with you, Professor Han. Now, South Korea, it was a country that long held Confucian values and had a Buddhist culture, and Christianity actually took off relatively recently in modern history. So when did Christmas actually become introduced to the country, and how was the tradition, how did the tradition really get started here?
Yeah, the first Christmas tree in Korea was prepared by a Christian missionary Mary Scranton, the founder of Ewha Girls School in 1886. And the first Santa Claus was acted by another missionary, Henry Appenzeller, the founder of Baeje College in 1887. On Christmas Day, he filled the socks with presents and gave them to the Baeje students. And what better things can the young boys expect in those days? By 1898, Christmas was rapidly settling as a pretty well-known popular event in Korea. And importantly, it was during the 1920s and 1930s under Japanese imperialism that especially the affluent young Korean men and women under the long Confucian tradition of self-control or arranged marriage embraced free Western-style dating and love marriage. Because these are part of modernity, they aspired rather than being traditional and outdated lifestyles in their views. So there is a long tradition of why Christmas has settled a day for young lovers in Korea. And then moving forward, it was by the American military government in 1945 as they declared Christmas Day a national public holiday, and again by Christian President Riesman in 1949, and it goes.
Oh, but Professor Han, how did the tradition become so widely celebrated though?
Now, with the start of the American military government in 1945, one way to control the people was a curfew. No civilians were allowed to move outside the home after 12 midnight. Otherwise, you are in police custody till the morning. But there were two exceptional days, Christmas and New Year's Eve. You know, winter solstice or Dongji is the winter day with the longest night on which Koreans stay as late as possible. I remember my mother telling me, if I went to bed too early, my eyebrows will go completely gray in the morning. Now, Koreans could not keep both Dongji and Christmas, which fall onto the end of the year, with the introduction of the Western solar calendar. Then the Korean Dongji, based on the lunar calendar, was pushed out of the Korean culture. I think another significant reason Christmas became popularized was that the Western missionaries preparing beautiful Christmas trees and inviting children to the church not only offered them the gospel, but the Christmas gift box from America, containing stationeries, candies, and cookies. No children could resist such temptation. This tradition, in practice during Japanese imperialism, was then transferred to the hands of Korean churches, especially after the Korean War. Therefore, exchanging presents has become an important part of Christmas. That is, of course, commercialization.
I see. Well, now let's bring Jacob into the conversation. So, in the Western culture, Christmas is usually a time for families to gather, share gifts, have really good food, turkey mostly, right? And overall just have a very merry time together. But here in Korea, it's quite different, isn't it? What's Christmas like back at home?
Yes, good morning. Surely it is very different. So I am half Swedish and half Norwegian. However, we celebrate Christmas kind of similar. Actually, we celebrate on the 24th, Christmas Eve. Christmas Day is not really important for us in that way. What we celebrate on the 24th, but basically the whole week before is building up to this event. So in my case, we usually go to the family cabin in the mountains, and we go skiing and sit in the sauna and play board games together with family members that you can basically only meet during this time of year. So Christmas Eve is kind of the crescendo, but this lazy couple of days before Christmas is what most people like the most. And then, of course, on Christmas Eve, we have rice porridge in the morning. We watch Christmas TV shows. We have some Christmas food. And then, of course, Santa comes with the presents. So Christmas Day for us is more like, I would probably call it like a food hangover, where we regret eating those last spoonfuls of meatballs or sausages the day before.
Well, I think that regret might be universal no matter where you go, right? But, well, how was your first Christmas here in South Korea?
Well, actually, the first time I spent Christmas in South Korea was the first time that I spent Christmas outside of Sweden and Norway. So it was back in 2016, and I still, for some way, wanted to keep this kind of Christmas feeling. So I went to one of these online traveling communities and found some other Swedish people who were currently in Seoul. However, it ended up with us having Korean barbecue, and later on went to a bar. So it was very, very different from the traditional Christmas that you would have at home. And that's when I also realized that clearly that this is not a family thing in Korea. This is for friends and for couples.
But barbecue, yes, very important. Good food is a very essential part of Christmas Day. And, well, Professor Han, now here in South Korea, you did mention this earlier in your response, but Christmas is sort of, it's actually settled as kind of a second Valentine's Day. All the restaurants, the eateries, the hotels, they're full to the brim, and it's mostly only couples that exchange gifts. How did it become so focused on romance?
Yeah. Christmas has become a day of celebration for lovers in Korea. I think important dimension of Korean Christmas is that Koreans leave home for activities outside the home, especially young people. I think this tradition of focusing on romance has much to do with the pathways that Korean society has gone through so rapidly, politically, culturally, and economically. South Koreans have admired the West, especially the American culture. And the young people in Korea lived under strict control by autocratic regimes for decades. For many young people, White Christmas Day is a dream come true day with absolute freedom and no control. It is a day for a party, entertainment, and people make an effort to create memorable moments. It is an eruption of young people's frustration and passion. And of course, profiteering continues to fuel this culture. Unfortunately, these days, an increasing number of young people are deprived of resources and unable to be part of these popular cultures. And this creates a severe degree of dissatisfaction, which develops as a form of discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots. Of course, here, the core message of Christmas is badly missing under extreme commercialization and entertainment.
And Jacob, well, I wonder what you actually make of this commercialization and this very couple-oriented culture of Christmas in Korea.
Well, first of all, I believe that it's not only Korea, it's Christmas in any country in the world now has become very commercialized. And it's not only Christmas, most major holidays have gone from probably their traditional core value to a more commercialized one. As a non-Korean, of course, it creates a bit of maybe a bit of a shock in the beginning. As I mentioned before, I really realized that it's very different than what people do back home. But then again, Korea already has two major family holidays with Chuseok and Seollal, where they can meet together. So I guess for the Koreans, maybe I don't really see the harm that this can be a day for when couples meet.
Mm-hmm. So, well, South Korea does indeed have two traditional holidays, the Lunar New Year and Chuseok, our version of Thanksgiving here in the country, when families do have big gatherings. But then you might say that it has quite a lot of these, well, Christmassy events, actually monthly events even. Professor Han, South Korea has a lot of days to celebrate each month, such as Bilateral Day, White Day, Black Day. The list really goes on all throughout the year, really. And why are there so many commercialized days? And do you think this is good for society?
No, it's not good for the society at all. But it's an important question for all of us, I think. Creating those commercialized days is not unique to Korea. And people are always in the business of attaching some meaning to their activities. And taking the example of Bilateral Day, say you grab 4 sticks of Bilateral and it looks like November 11th. What has this got to do with the friends or lovers sharing these chocolate sticks? Yeah, there is nothing wrong with having some fun out of these between the friends. And I am sure Bilateral company makes a good profit out of this. I think these things can go out of hand as to what is really important in our community. If you allow, I would add that talking about the spirit of Christmas, it is the baby Jesus incarnation to forgive and be friendly to the sinful world. Then we ask now, how do we share Jesus' teaching with the orphans and widows today? Or it could be about Korean political leaders creating a community more caring of each other, all Koreans prospering together, reducing the proportion of the disadvantaged population, creating more life opportunities for young people in particular. I think these are some urgent and big questions, but achievable, as there are examples like Sweden and other European countries. I know Korea has enough talents with strategies and resources. The question is whether they have the will to do that.
And well, Professor Han, well, one might argue that South Koreans already have 2 big holidays, Lunar New Year and Chuseok, Thanksgiving, to gather with their families. But in recent years, we've seen a decline in people going home, back to their hometowns to spend time with their family on Seollal and Chuseok. And they're actually spending more time alone, going on staycations or going abroad. What's the reason for this shift in trend, and do you think it's going to continue?
Yeah, I think a very popular notion in Korea is that the Chuseok and Seollal are about family gatherings, and the Christmas is for the lovers to spend time together outside the home. In this respect, Christmas has got very little to do with Christianity. It is about freeing themselves away from long working hours in an affluent Korea because they can afford it. Perhaps the cost of going for 1 week holiday in Southeast Asia is comparable to the cost of traveling in Korea for a week. I remember Japanese tourists in the 1980s with so much value of Japanese yen doing what Koreans are doing now. I think the critical juncture that has brought about this culture of staycations and going abroad is the 1988 Seoul Olympics. Prior to that time, Koreans were willing to sacrifice their personal needs for the sake of national development, and the spirit of can-do was really prevalent. However, in affluent Korea, Koreans ask, what is there for me? And what can my nation and company do for me? At the same time, interestingly, they continue to care for the wealth of the nation for their own sake. This is what I might call calculated nationalism. I think there are lots of positives here, and it's not all that bad, and the trend will continue, I think.
See, well, before we go, Jacob, for those who are away from their families here in South Korea this Christmas, are there any little-known advantages of spending it here in the country? And do you have any recommendations on how they can feel the festivity and really make the most of this Christmas?
Well, absolutely. I was talking before about the family holiday back home in Sweden, but the downside of that is, of course, that people who don't have a family to spend it with are bound to feel very, very lonely. So in Korea, there's always something that you can do on Christmas, even though you're not spending it with your family. For the recommendation, I would first begin to say that it's not going to be like home, and the sooner you realize that, the better. But there are still plenty of things that you can do here. You can go outside in nature. While social distancing, you can try to go hiking. You can invite friends over for dinner. But I also feel that one important thing this Christmas is that we should probably send a thought to those families around the world that right now have members in the ICU. And of course, this Christmas is not ideal. It's not what any of us wanted, but it is what we have right now. And as the professor was talking about before, the core value of Christmas, I think it's more important now than ever that we really embrace this core value and think about each other and take care of each other. So hopefully then we can celebrate a normal Christmas next year.
I see. Well, this is where we're going to have to wrap up this interview. That was Han Gyu-soo, Associate Professor of Communications and Media Studies at Monash University, and Jacob Minul, Graduate School student at Seogang University in Seoul. Thank you both so much for your time, and have a lovely Christmas.
Thank you. Merry
Thanks
Christmas.
for having me.
BTS have become the first non-Japanese group to top the Oricon annual album sales chart. BTS The Best, released in June, has sold almost 1 million copies so far in Japan, the highest number this year. Michael Jackson was the first foreign solo artist to achieve this feat back in 1984 with his album Thriller. The BTS album also recorded the highest number of first-week sales in Japan by any male foreign artist.
Now, staying with entertainment, several South Koreans have made Variety's list of the 500 most influential business leaders in the entertainment industry. In music, the founder of SM Entertainment, Lee Soo-man, and the mastermind behind BTS, Bang Si-hyuk. For the film industry, Bong Joon-ho, who won an Oscar for Parasite, and one of the movie's main producers, the vice chairman of CJ Group, Mickey Lee. A newcomer is the Korean-American actor Steven Yeun, who played the leading man in the film Minari.
let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. The death toll from the sinking of a cargo ship off the coast of northeastern Madagascar rose to 83 on Wednesday. However, poor weather conditions have halted the search for 5 other missing passengers. The director of operations at sea at the Maritime and River Port Agency say the ship was not authorized to take passengers and was overloaded. Water flooded the engine before it sank on Monday. 50 survivors have been found so far, as the search for 5 other missing passengers will resume on Thursday. Search and rescue teams have had it rough as well, as a police chief swam for nearly 12 hours to shore after the search helicopter he was on crashed at sea late on Monday, amid efforts to locate survivors of the boat accident.
Our helicopter may have been caught in a gust of wind or something and fell. Then the helicopter crashed. I didn't have a life jacket. There were 2 of us who didn't have a life jacket. The pilot and the mechanic had them, so I immediately took the pilot's seat and used it as a lifeline. This saved me. I swam from 7:30 at night until 7:30 the next morning.
With the death toll expected to rise, President Andry Rajoelina announced a national day of mourning for Thursday. A 72-million-year-old dinosaur embryo has been discovered inside a fossilized egg, which scientists describe as one of the best preserved specimens of its kind ever found. Dubbed Baby Ying Liang, the embryo was discovered in Ganzhou in southern China and is known to be that of a toothless theropod dinosaur known as Oviraptorosaur.
And we can see a very clean and well-preserved skull, which doesn't have any teeth. And this feature is actually it's very typical in Oviraptorosaur. And because of this feature, we assigned, and together with other anatomical features, we assigned this specimen to Oviraptorosaur.
The fossilized egg was discovered in late Cretaceous rock in 2000, and scientists have been examining it over the last 4 years before the embryo inside was found. Israeli archaeologists announced on Wednesday that a ring bearing an early Christian depiction of Jesus as a shepherd was among treasure recovered from 2 ancient shipwrecks off the Holy Land coast. The gold and green gemstone ring is engraved with a figure of a young boy bearing a sheep on his shoulders and was found along the hundreds of silver and bronze coins in the Mediterranean waters. The discovery also includes Roman-era figurines and date back to 600 and 1700 years ago. The Good Shepherd image is known to be among the most enduring in Christianity, as it describes Jesus and his relationship to his group of faithful followers in the Book of John. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. The weather looks to be similar to yesterday, but Chungcheong-Bukdo province will have high levels of fine dust all day, while Chungcheong-Namdo and Jeollabuk-do provinces will have dusty air through the morning. Much of Korea is set for a big freeze for Christmas weekend. You'll notice much colder air from tomorrow, which is Christmas Eve. Then on Christmas Day, lows will dip to minus 13 degrees and a high of minus 7 degrees here in the capital, and even colder on Sunday. Also, there is heavy snow in the forecast for Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do province tomorrow. East of Gangwon-do province could see up to 20 centimeters of blizzards, so residents need to be prepared ahead of the severe weather conditions. Morning temperatures are similar to yesterday. Daejeon at minus 3, minus 2 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju this morning. Highs will also be similar to yesterday. Daejeon, Daegu going up to 10 degrees, which is not too bad. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. We'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time tomorrow for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
Yes, and I'm Mark Broom. I'll be back with more news at 10 a.m. Korea time in just over an hour from now. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Goodbye.